World News Today, brought to you by Admiral Corporation, world's largest manufacturer of radio phonographs with automatic record changers. This program is presented in behalf of Admiral dealers all over America. By shortwave broadcast direct from important overseas stations and leading news centers in our own country, CBS reporters are waiting to bring you first-hand news from the world's political and battlefronts. Now, here's Robert Trout.
The Japanese radio says that Mustang fighter planes, 150 of them, have attacked airfields in the Tokyo area. Nearly 250,000 Japanese refugees from American bombs are being moved to Hokkaido, the northernmost of the home islands, just below the Kuriles. Navy headquarters at Guam announces that 5 Japanese suicide planes have hit 3 of Britain's first-line aircraft carriers off the Ryukyus. They are the Indefatigable, the Victorious, and the Illustrious. But all 3 suffered only minor damage. The Australian troops who've invaded eastern Borneo have pushed 3 miles deeper into the oil refinery area near Balikpapan, but in one sector, Japanese resistance is now stiffened. In Australia, a crowd of 30,000 gathered today in the cemetery at Perth as the late Prime Minister John Curtin was buried. In Germany, the Russians are still in complete control of Berlin following the arrival of American, British, and French troops. At last report, no solution had been found to the problem of who is going to provide food and fuel for the Germans within the new American and British zones of the city. Yugoslavia's Marshal Tito, in a broadcast over the Belgrade radio today, accused Greek forces of firing across the border between Greece and Yugoslavia. And now the news direct from the Pacific. Admiral takes you to CBS Guam. Tim Lamert reporting.
Several hours ago, the Navy revealed that 3 carriers of the British Pacific Fleet had recently been hit by suicide planes during the 2-month operation against the Jap-held Sakashima Islands, southwest of Okinawa. The Japs sent a great number of planes against these ships, and although most of them failed, 3 of the kamikazes managed to hit. HMS Indefatigable was struck twice on the same day. An unnamed carrier was hit twice on successive days, and HMS Victorious absorbed 1. Aside from these 5 direct hits, 3 Jap planes scored near misses. However, even though the plummeting planes caused explosions and fires to rage, the firefighters and damage control men got things quickly under control, and all had planes operating from their flight decks within a very short time. Not one of the ships suffered enough damage to be forced to return for repairs and withdraw from the action. Despite these semi-successful raids by the kamikazes, the operations of the British task force were not in the least affected. In all, the Japs lost a total of 140 planes, either destroyed or damaged. Including these attacks and all other forms of Japanese action, the British lost a total of 70 men killed and 34 seriously wounded. Only 1 ship from the task force, the destroyer Ulster, was forced to return for repairs. The purpose of the 2 months operation against the Sakashima group was primarily to keep this important staging base neutralized, so that the Japs couldn't bring in planes to send at our forces in the Okinawa area. This latest announcement shows that against the British ships, too, the kamikaze plane is not a very effective weapon. This is Tim Lamert at Pacific Fleet Headquarters at Guam. I return you to Admiral in New York.
Next, a word from Warren Sweeney.
I'll bet a lot of you would like to see that Admiral dual-temp refrigerator that doesn't have any coils to defrost, or an Admiral radio phonograph with an automatic record changer that takes only 5 seconds to change records, or perhaps you're interested in an Admiral electric range that automatically cooks a whole meal for you while you're out shopping. And from your letters, we know many of you are thinking about home freezers and would like to see the Admiral home freezer that keeps food summer fresh all winter. But with Admiral still 100% in war work, of course, they can't build any of these grand Admiral products to show you. But they have prepared a beautiful, full-colored booklet that will show you exactly what these new Admiral radios and appliances will look like and tell you how they'll perform. This booklet is called It's a Promise from Admiral, and it's yours for the asking. There's nothing for you to do to get your copy except write, It's a Promise together with your name and address on a penny postcard, and mail it to Admiral in care of the station to which you are listening. Then you'll be able to see what's new and revolutionary in Admiral radios and radio phonographs, dual-temp refrigerators, electric ranges, and home freezers. It's a promise from Admiral. Now here once again is Robert Trout.
An extra report on this busy first week in Berlin for American occupation forces. Admiral takes you to CBS Berlin. Richard C. Huttelet reporting.
For weeks now, American troops have been streaming into Berlin, and the southwestern part of the city is full of them. They carry arms and go in pairs for safety's sake, but so far there's been no trouble at all. There must be close to 20,000 Americans here now, more than Berlin has ever seen. And not even the cold weather and the almost incessant rain have kept the GIs from getting out and seeing the sights. They go strolling up and down, looking at the terrific bomb damage, and take pictures shaking hands with Russian soldiers. They stand in front of their billets and theaters and whistle at pretty German girls. But don't think the men have been doing nothing else. In this week, many of the organizations have been moving in who will help govern Berlin and Germany. And this goes for the British on our left as well as for us. Vast amounts of office space and billets have been found and put in order, wires strung, and a million housekeeping details set right. We've found in Berlin a Russian military government organization working full swing. The Russians have done a great deal of work in these last 2 months. Miles of streets that we saw stinking and smoking and choked with rubble in the early days of May have been cleaned up. Much of the subway system is functioning again. A few trolley lines and some motor buses. Theaters, restaurants, barber shops have been opened. A working city government set up. And beyond that, the Russians have sponsored the formation of political parties and of labor unions. They've helped open newspapers. Schools and churches are working again. Courts are functioning. And there's a sizable German police force. Now, even work has begun on repairing buildings. All in all, it's a pretty good record. Now, Berlin is broken up into 3 zones, and a French zone will be added to make it 4. It's been agreed that the city will be governed as a unit with no differences among the zones. The British, Russian, and American military commanders, and later on the French, will be the supervising body. The German administration appointed by the Russians will remain. But there appear now to be some difficulties in this field. For one thing, no one knows the exact boundaries of any of the zones. And another thing, our methods of military government differ. We prohibit politics. The Russians encourage it. We want the Russians to keep on feeding and supplying coal to the people in our zones of the city. And there are several other problems. We can't take over the administration until these things are settled. And the Russians who had been moving out today resumed military government control of our area. Now, this isn't tragic and it isn't sinister. It's just awkward. But it shows a lack of planning that could become tragic and sinister if it extended to more important fields. But much more than the administration of Berlin is going to be decided here. In a week or 10 days, Truman and Churchill and Stalin will meet in Potsdam. There, they will decide the government of Germany. They will at least outline some kind of political and economic structure to fill the vacuum that war has left in Central Europe, Poland, and the Balkans. And most important of all, they'll try to put the good words and good intentions of San Francisco into practice. A great machine is moving into Berlin to govern Germany. The American group of this control council and the British are arriving. The Russians have ordered 1,149 rooms in Goering's former air ministry to be repaired by September 1st to serve as offices for the Russian unit. A lot will depend on how these organizations work. My main impression after this first week in Berlin, and it's only one reporter's opinion, is that things look hopeful. There are differences between us and the Russians in approach and in method, and things like politics, food, non-fraternization. But there is basic agreement, and above all, a mutual desire to make this thing work, which is all you can ask. This is Richard C. Huttelet in Berlin, returning you to Admiral in New York.
For the news from Britain, Admiral takes you to CBS London, Douglas Edwards reporting.
About the most prominent
bit of on-the-surface news in Britain this warm Sunday is the announcement that Prime Minister Churchill has arrived at his holiday house on the French side of the Franco-Spanish frontier. He'll return to Britain after the Big Three meeting in Potsdam, or if the conference should still be going on when the votes are counted on the 26th, Mr. Churchill will fly back to London for the results. Meantime, Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden will take over at number 10 Downing Street tomorrow morning. Later, he too will journey to Berlin for the three-power discussion. Londoners, by the way, are looking forward with great interest to the possible visit of President Truman. They, like most of Britain, will have been very favorably impressed with his handling of American and international affairs since the death of President Roosevelt. There is the firm realization here that America this time does not intend to take a back seat at the peace conference or in the future of the world affairs. And the fact that the United States Senate may be the first of the United Nations governing bodies to ratify the San Francisco Charter is also considered as giving emphatic punctuation to our future intentions of furthering the cause of international cooperation. There's a great deal of comment in the London papers today on Big Three policy in Germany. The Sunday Times, for one, points out that the collapse of the German nation was so swift in its final stages that by comparison, progress since has seemed slow. But things are moving. Berlin is occupied by troops of America, Britain, and Russia, and the Big Three are about to tackle administration problems of the utmost urgency. There are sharp differences between East and West, differences in ideas and in ways of life. Those cleavages already are being manifest, and the Sunday Times hopes the powers soon may agree on a common policy. This has been Britain's greatest going-away weekend since the beginning of the war. Railway stations all over the country have been besieged with vacationers. They call them holiday makers. As you know, they queue up for everything over here almost, and that doesn't exclude railway tickets. They jammed Paddington and Euston and Victoria and Charing Cross and Waterloo and the other stations, but they jammed them in long lines, a very orderly kind of jamming. Loudspeakers were used to control the passengers bound for the beaches, and to entertain them with music while they waited. The weather, perfect for an American, about 75 degrees and clear, but for the Britisher, a heat wave, no less, and he was out to escape it, and did. And this is Douglas Edwards in London, returning you to Admiral in New York.
CBS correspondent Webley Edwards flew over Korea yesterday for an interview recorded from Okinawa with a naval officer who accompanied the plane. Admiral takes you now to San Francisco.
I've just returned from a flight over Korea, 700 miles on to the west of Tokyo. I flew in a Navy privateer, a Fleet Air Wing 1, one of 4 planes on this mission. Their purpose was to shoot up or sink Japanese cargo ships running the blockade between Japan and the Asiatic mainland through the myriad islands on the south and west coast of Korea. Our plane sank 4 Jap ships and damaged 1. I was along to make a broadcast back to the United States. Just before we hit Korea, we ran into a heavy storm with thunder and lightning, tossed us about and would have snapped off our trailing antenna. So we barely got contact only 2 minutes before broadcast time, and the atmospherics were still difficult on this Sunday morning. But though it was noisy, we had the great thrill of broadcasting a description of Lieutenant Commander E.G. Doc Binning's privateer swooping down to strafe 2 Jap ships and sink them. And then to watch another Jap cargo ship bombed and sunk. And then to go into a long, roaring run ourselves on a Jap freighter transport. All our guns were going, and from somewhere on shore, a Jap anti-aircraft gun was after us, way low and behind. It was quite a sensation. Our pilot and squadron commander, Lieutenant Commander Arthur F. Farwell, Jr. of Chicago and Pensacola, is with me here back on Okinawa. Arthur, how would you describe this mission?
A fairly successful patrol. Jap cargo ships aren't as plentiful as they were a few weeks ago when we first started in on Korea, but the boys managed to get a few almost every day.
Arthur's a modest guy. He chased a Jap fighter with his big bomber and was peeved because he couldn't catch him. You fellas went way up into the interior of Korea on July 4th after railway facilities. Will you tell us about that one?
The idea was to disrupt the Korean railways, carrying supplies and men and materials both ways between Japan, Manchuria, and China. We managed to get way in and make a number of hits.
The official count was 2 bridges destroyed and 2 damaged. Several tunnels caved in, powerhouses and installations destroyed, 2 locomotives destroyed and several damaged in the first sweep of its kind over Korea, which should have slowed down the Korean railways. Aren't you heading for Washington, D.C. in a new assignment? You'll stop at Pensacola to see Mrs. Farwell and the boys, Arthur and Richard? But I will, right soon now. That's Lieutenant Commander Arthur Farwell. He's a squadron and a pilot during today's broadcast over Korea. 11,000 miles across the world from New York. Through the work of these Fleet Air Wing 1 4-engine privateer search bombers, the waters around South Korea and the seas nearby, thanks to the work of the great guys who fly them, now belong to us. This is Webley Edwards at Okinawa. I return you to Admiral in New York.
Supreme Headquarters in Europe is about to be broken up. For a report by one of our correspondents who's been with SHAEF from the beginning, Admiral takes you to CBS Paris, Charles Collingwood reporting.
It has been announced that SHAEF, the Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Forces, will be dissolved next weekend, probably Friday. Thus will pass the institution which gave this war a new dimension. For the idea of a joint command, a command in which nationality did not play a part, transformed the whole character of the war. It is unlikely that the credit for the idea should go to General Eisenhower. Probably a lot of people had the idea. But there is no question at all that it was Eisenhower who made it work. Eisenhower was the supreme commander. But he was more than that. In previous wars, Allies always appointed a supreme commander. He had on his staff liaison officers from the armies of his allies. They were like ambassadors from their armies, and generally they acted like them. The army of each ally generally went its own way, each one anxious to get the lion's share of the credit, and each one intent on its own interests. But when Eisenhower became supreme commander for the North African campaign, he created a staff whose members were not working for their own armies. They were working for all the armies in the command. Nationality did not enter into it. The British G2 on Eisenhower's staff handled the intelligence for both the American and British forces. The American G3 handled the operations for all. British and Americans worked in the same offices on the same problems. They lived in the same houses. They called each other by their first names. Everyone was working for the team. No one was working for their own part of it. At least that was the theory. But back in those days, some people couldn't see it Eisenhower's way, and a whole fistful of American officers were sent home. But on the whole, Allied Force Headquarters, as it was then called, worked well in North Africa. When Eisenhower became Supreme Commander for the invasion of Europe, he built the same kind of staff. It was called SHAEF, and it worked even better. Never before in the history of warfare had there been such an instrument of command, and it is likely that history will show that never before had such diverse and massive forces been handled with such ease and sureness. But it is not this technical aspect which is so important now that SHAEF is about to disappear. The most important thing about it for the future is that SHAEF made the alliance work. That SHAEF showed that different peoples can pursue the same end in complete trust and confidence and cooperation. An alliance doesn't have to split up in everyone chasing his own special interest. SHAEF showed that, and General Eisenhower showed it to SHAEF. We and our allies are going to have common problems in the future. General Eisenhower and SHAEF have shown us the way to solve them. This is Charles Collingwood in Paris, returning you to Admiral in New York.
Tomorrow, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee opens hearings on the United Nations Charter. For a summary of what the Capitol expects, Admiral takes you now to CBS Washington, Tris Coffin reporting.
A democracy is a strange and wonderful thing. Beginning tomorrow, Americans who want to have their say for or against the United Nations Charter have an official open forum to express their views. It is the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The hearings will be open to all who can crowd into the Senate caucus room, where so many issues affecting the lives of all Americans have been debated. The words spoken in this room will be fully reported by radio and press. Thousands of letters will come in from all parts of the country to help the senators make their decision. The first witness will be former Secretary of State Edward R. Stettinius. He is the man who guided the charter, first through the formative stage of the Dumbarton Oaks meeting, and then next through to the final dotting of the T's at San Francisco. He will have to answer many critical questions frankly and openly. For some members of the committee have reservations they want cleared up before they vote yes or no. The hearing will be fairly swift. The senators are not interested in hearing a lot of oratory. Chairman Tom Connolly expects to send his committee report to the Senate near the middle of the month. A final affirmative vote is forecast for early in August. There is no longer any question of Senate approval of the charter. The question is whether any senator will vote against it. We have strange cases, too, in Congress. Millions of dollars and the operations of vital war agencies are tied hand and foot in Congress. And all because of an argument over a tiny agency, the Fair Employment Practices Committee. It is one item in the overall war agency's appropriation bill. But democracy here, too, is at work. Both sides have had their say. Now the older heads in Congress are working out a compromise, due to hit the floor next week. I return you to Admiral in New York.
The confusion in Berlin, which was discussed a few moments ago by Columbia's correspondent there, Richard C. Hottelet, is not the result of any serious disagreement on basic policy between the four occupying powers. As further details are brought to light, the trouble seems more and more to be centered on the matter of food and fuel. The American and British officers in the city have been unable to make arrangements for the Russians to provide food for those Germans who live within the American and British zones of Berlin. The Russian officers are saying this kind of decision must be made by higher authorities. And as it looks today, this is another problem for the Big Three to decide at their forthcoming meeting near Berlin. Actually, straightening out the kinks in the Berlin arrangements will form just one point in the complicated decisions which the three statesmen must make so that all Germany can be governed by the four occupying nations under rules that are coordinated for all four zones. Dispatches from Moscow tell us that the Russians want the Big Three agreements on Germany to be not merely temporary, but complete permanent plans to prevent the Germans from ever assembling the power to start war. And at the conference, the Russians will be prepared to discuss such definite topics as war criminals and international cartels. In addition to Germany, the Russians are reported to be ready to discuss plans for the former satellite countries, such as Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. And undoubtedly, Marshal Stalin will bring up the question of the present governments of Spain and Argentina. And it's generally agreed that at this meeting, more than at any previous one, attention will be turned to the Pacific, where already, without firing a shot against the Japanese, the Red Army in Siberia is pinning down more than 1 million Japanese troops in Manchuria. And now to tell you about a new foolproof automatic record changer, here is Warren Sweeney.
Foolproof is the correct word, all right. For the amazing Admiral automatic record changer you'll get post-war. Its quiet, efficient, automatic action will bring new enjoyment to your recorded music programs. The new Admiral changer will have only 3 moving parts during the change cycle. It will be foolproof and service-free. You're going to like the easy, careful handling your favorite records will get, and you'll like the speedy 5-second record changing time. You'll thrill to the glorious natural tone of your Admiral radio phonograph, and you'll be proud of its beautiful cabinet, designed by Admiral's master craftsmen. But we can't tell you in this short time about all the exclusive Admiral features. So why not let us send you our fascinating full-colored booklet, It's a Promise from Admiral. It's free. Just write, It's a Promise, together with your name and address on a penny postcard and mail it to Admiral in care of this station. Your government urgently asks you to play square with meat. The current meat shortage is the most serious since the beginning of the war, due to a decrease in production, a great increase in demand, and uneven distribution of the available supply. Every consumer can help stamp out the black market in meat by observing these 2 rules in every meat transaction. Always pay ration points in full, and never pay more than ceiling prices for any meat you buy. It's the fair way. It's the American way. World News Today is brought to you each Sunday at this hour by Admiral Corporation, makers of Admiral Radio, America's smart set, and post-war makers of Admiral dual-temp refrigerators, Admiral home freezers, Admiral electric ranges. Be sure to listen again next Sunday when Admiral brings you World News Today by shortwave, direct from leading news centers of the world. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
This is the WBBM Air Theater, Wrigley Building, Chicago.